I just love you guys. I swear, I feel like if anybody really kind of got what I do and why I do what I do, it'd be people in rooms like this. And yeah, it just feels like I'm with my tribe. So I just need to put that out there and get it out of my system so I can go on. Yeah. So, so I did write this book called Reclaiming Your Community. And what I did with it is my first book, and what I wanted people to really understand what I was talking about. So I ended up putting my glossary literally as the first chapter of my book. And I use a couple terms because frankly, I want people to understand what I'm talking about, like even before they get into the meat of the book, when they read it. And so there are two phrases that I want to be clear that I talk about. One is the nonprofit industrial complex. And yeah, I took the last part, industrial complex, when I first heard, Eisenhower talk about the military-industrial complex, which is the whole point. Like you create wars to perpetuate the military complex itself. And I do believe that somehow or another there's the nonprofit industrial complex as well that seeks to make it happen. And I know there have been definitely some folks who had issues with that, with the phrase, but I want to be clear how I define it, which is that it's a collection of philanthropic, corporate funders, government agencies, and the nonprofit organizations that feed on the existence of inequality, thereby losing any organic motivation to solve inequality. The work that Habitat for Humanity does is the exact opposite of that. So thank you for understanding that that's what you do, because you are definitely not part of that complex. Y'all are making change the way that it should be. God bless you all. And the other phrase, which is also, I think, a little interesting, is called low-status communities. And these are the communities that are generally referred to as poor or low income or underprivileged, but we use low status because it implies something larger is at work, that there's a higher status and there's a lower status, and that inequality is a well-established fact. So these are the places where schools and public health, air and water, equality, parks and trees and food options and career opportunities are worse in some areas than they are in other parts of the same town. Think of the communities like this near you. They're everywhere. They're inner cities, they're Native American reservations, they're white Rust Belt towns where industry has come and gone, and they're all over the world. And most importantly, bright kids who grew up in them are expected to measure success by how far they get away from those communities. They're in urban, suburban, rural areas. They're the places where inequality is assumed by those who live there and also those on the outside looking in. This talk is about our approach to community development, which focuses on talent retention. And we know that's a common strategy that's used in the business community because successful companies, they don't invest in talent so that their competition can hire them away. They keep their people motivated. They want them to grow with the company, lean into the mission so that they're actually being inspired to actually help to support their bottom line, so because it also supports them as individuals. So we want people to think about that as we're doing this, because successful companies practice talent retention. They don't want to spend time and money, investing in somebody else so somebody hires them away. Yet we spend billions and billions of dollars of philanthropic, government, and private dollars in low-status communities to allegedly support the people in them, yet the overall outcomes don't get much better. And we're not retaining the talent that was born and raised in those communities, whether academically or artistically, or athletically, inclined. We're not expecting them to stay in their own communities where that talent, where that kind of love and support is actually needed and appreciated. We're expecting them to go and enhance somebody else's community. So I believe that talent retention, the same tool that successful companies use in order to grow their companies, can also be used to build and support great neighborhoods for the people that were born and raised in them. Whereas my hometown in the South Bronx, well, didn't practice a talent retention strategy. In fact, it's the kind of place that one would call a talent repulsion strategy was employed. So this is my neighborhood. the block that I would walk to on the subway on the way to get me to the subway to go to the Bronx High School of Science, which is one of the best high schools in the entire country. And I got some Bronx Science people up in here. Go, okay, there you go. We just turned 85 this year, so by the way, so I will talk later. So this was in the middle of the crack epidemic, middle 80s, but this was a far cry from, this building was actually a crack house. It was a far cry from what my parents, who moved up into Hunts Point in the South Bronx back in the 1940s, what they moved from. They came from down south. Actually, my father was from only 7 miles away from Plains, Georgia, also a Carter, so another famous Carter from that general area. So, and I think you know who I'm talking about. And my mom's from South Carolina. They all moved up north looking for their great American dream. I mean, they were escaping Jim Crow, the terrorism that unfortunately was produced in our country. They ended up in Hunts Point, and it was a mostly white, working to middle class community where a lot of people walked to work because there was an industrial section right around. And then later on, other blacks from down south, and then also from the Caribbean, as well as brown folks from there as well, moved up north, all looking for their great American dream. White flight happened, as did the highway construction boom when cars became king. And we know all over the country, when those highways were created to move those cars, they were often built like through communities of color. Redlining, which is when banks would come up with policies that would literally openly discriminate where they were going to place their investments and loans and mortgages and stuff like that. And usually it had to do with the presence of people of color, in particular starting with black folks. In those neighborhoods where they weren't making investments, the companies would have to move, and they ended up either going to right-to-work states or overseas. And what took its place was this kind of burdensome, environmental infrastructure, that served a public good, whether it was waste facilities or power plants or things of that nature. But the impacts of them all were in communities of color for the most part. And this is just an early networking opportunity of mine. I was on the phone with the Easter Bunny telling him, Santa Claus, look, I've been a really good girl, and Easter Bunny's here to prove it, just want to let you know. But this is what I grew up with around that same time. The South Bronx was literally burning. As a result of all that financial disinvestment, we saw many landlords literally torching their own buildings to collect insurance money because that's all that was there. But we grow up seeing these kind of things and feeling like this is all we had to offer, in our world. I saw us on the nightly news. We're led to believe that we had nothing in our community except pimps and pushers and prostitutes, even though it was so strange to me because we definitely had a lot more than that. Yes, it's true, the South Bronx lost about 60% of the population, roughly around that same amount of its housing stock as a result of the fires, but we were still a community with love and just love in it. I knew the neighbors that were left, and they loved us because we didn't have any much more to go on. We had to be there for each other. And that is still the case right now. We are a community that's filled with wonderful people. We are daycare providers who've literally raised 3 generations of our community. We're filmmakers and entrepreneurs. We're doctors, medical professionals and nurses. And the woman with the Cose with my Rose t-shirt on, is a woman who combined her 2 greatest loves. She's both wine and books. And she opened up a store called a wine store, bookstore called the Lit Bar, as in lit like literature, lit like tipsy. Yeah, there you go. The gentleman in the top photo is Marcus Samuelson. If you're a big foodie, he's actually a celebrity chef, comes up to see us sometime. The young man in the middle photo is Christian Navarro, who's this awesome young actor, got his first start or rather his big break in 13 Reasons Why. His family's from right up the street from me. They're still there. But seeing all that, but still, I was led to believe you measure success by how far you get away from your community. Again, growing up in the burning Bronx, the last thing I wanted to do was stay. So I used my education to get out. But when I graduated college, already was going to graduate school, and I needed a cheap place to stay because I couldn't afford, the dorms downtown. I went to NYU, and I had to move back in with my parents. But it was that wonderful moment, thank God for it, that I got to move back into my parents' house, even though in my old neighborhood, even though I felt like it was a defeat for me personally, what it was it got me connected with my own neighborhood again. And it was around the time the city and state were planning on building a huge waste facility on our waterfront. And I realized it was because we happened to be a poor community of color and thus politically vulnerable. And I became a part of the real push to help the city understand a more sustainable solid waste management plan. But I also realized, that was a fight that we needed to have, and it was true. We needed to be fighting, against stuff that we know openly discriminated against poor folks and people of color. However, I also knew we needed to be fighting for the kind of things that made us feel as though we had something to look forward to. And I know I can get an amen from all of you about that, because y'all know that. And so what I started thinking about was I ended up getting a little notice from this group from the U.S. Forest Service that was working with the city's Parks Department to help reclaim and support threatened urban rivers around the country. And the Bronx River was one of them. And so that's when I realized that we could actually use the revitalization of our river, to get people down to it, to think about looking at our neighborhood in a completely different way. So we got this little $10,000 seed grant. My dog actually pulled me into what I thought was that dump that you saw at the first one. And honestly, if I didn't have a big old dog with me, I would not have gone looking for the Bronx River. But fortunately for her, I did, or for my community, I did. And so we took that little seed grant, paid for lunches for volunteers, little bits of programming, supplies, and we were able to turn it into this beta version. But then we realized we really needed to do more than that, and we started to do programming from boat building. We did canoe rides, just senior citizen centers would get down there and and do salsa lessons on it, and it was just like the coolest thing. But this is one of my favorite photos. You can see I'm simply posing. Because I was at that time. I was just like, we are here to celebrate, a $3 million redevelopment project. I worked 7 years to get us here, so yes, I'm gonna smile for my close-up. Thank you. And I got it, so there you go, that's what we did. But it went from this, and mind you, this was like before we all had cameras on our phones, or there were phones, they were easily accessible, and this is what it looked like after like 6 cleanups, because I wasn't taking pictures before then. But then our beta version, and this is what it looks like now. So this is the Hunts Point Riverside Park as she exists. And it was just, it's the kind of thing that reflects right back on the community that's there. I got married there back in 2006. My dog was my flower girl. Yes, I owe her a big, huge debt of thanks, because if it hadn't been for her, I don't think I would have gone looking for that place. And, there she is with her well-deserved, National Award for Excellence in Urban Design. Thank you, Zena. But when we ask folks in our community the kind of things that they look forward to, when they think about our neighborhood, it's sort of damning, to be honest. So as a developer, part of my work was to literally help understand what was it about communities that made people either want to stay or want to leave. And we would ask, in particular, young people that were graduating high school and going to college, and we did that because in the South Bronx, especially in my part, we had more kids graduating and going to college over the last 10 years than we've had in the previous 30. So it was a big deal. It was a big deal for so many of us. But thank you. But when we'd ask them, we were very proud too, but when we'd ask them, so what do you think the neighborhood needs now? And they'd say things like, oh, well, it needs, more affordable housing for really poor people, only poor people, and homeless shelters, because that's probably where they're gonna end up. And then we also need more health clinics, because everybody's sick, or they're got all sorts of issues. And then we need more community centers for the kids, to keep them out of trouble. And it just seemed like not the funnest neighborhood you want to be in, frankly. And then when we'd ask them, so you're going to graduate high school, go to college, get yourself a career, you're going to come back here? And they'd be like, the way that only teenagers can talk to you. But they were just clear. What they were saying, those are the markers of poverty. And they wanted nothing to do with it. And so that led us to believe, if we're really stopping to think about the way, what they've been, totally filled with over the years of being in our community, is the kind of thing that we've heard is that poverty is actually part of our culture. So we build to it. Poverty is actually created by the policies that make it so that people stay in it. But that's not what we've often felt that the nonprofit, industrial complex and the programming and then support that they would get from our government and other different agencies, specifically focused on our community that we'd see. But when we asked people and did hundreds of surveys, like, what do you think that you need in the neighborhood of your dreams? Of course, frankly, we were not at all surprised that any of them would come down with like the things that they readily saw in the neighborhood. They all talked about the things that they would leave the neighborhood in order to experience. And with them, they took, whether it was cafes and bars, housing that matched their income, all sorts of things that they wanted to see in their world. And we realized that when they were leaving the neighborhood, sooner or later, they would stay away. And with taking with them their beautiful positive example, their economic spending power, all of those things, and we were leaving us in a place where we felt deficient, the people who stayed there. And so that's why, we realized that there were only two kinds of real estate development, ways to do real estate development in poor communities like ours. One is we see gentrification happening, the price goes up, often people are pushed out because they don't own anything. And then the other kind is poverty level economic maintenance. So you're in a low status community when you don't see many opportunities for their healthy and affordable produce. You just see greasy spoons and mostly fast food joints. You can find places to spend your money in the neighborhood, but chances are you'll want to leave it in order to make you feel like you're good about how you're spending your cash. If you're in a low status community, when you see plenty of things like $99 stores or your main retail opportunity, and pharmacies, a multi-billion economic engine for this country, huge portion of their balance sheet comes directly from low status community, where we see that there are folks that do have, the diabetes and obesity, cancers related to the environmental impacts, in those neighborhoods as well. Places where you can get self-medicated. I could also add smoke shops, to this photo as well. And if you want to save your money, it's going to be hard for you to do that in a low-status neighborhood because you won't find banks or credit unions, but you'll find payday loan places and pawn shops, check cashing stores, things like that. Last but not least, you'll find plenty amounts of very highly subsidized affordable housing. And so before anybody says, oh my God, Majora Carter must have a real problem with low status communities and the poor people in them, not true. What Majora does have a problem with, and I should not be talking about myself in the third person, what I do have a problem with is the fact that when you take all of these poverty level economic maintenance projects and you concentrate them, what you also do is concentrate poverty and all of the impacts associated with it. Everything from lower health outcomes, low educational attainment, higher rates, of bad policing, and also, people involved in the justice system. All of the markers of poverty, all of the social determinants of health, you get them all when you concentrate poverty and you exacerbate it. So why are we doing that? I mean, I know you're not, but that's what we do. Our policies do that, especially when we assume that poverty in of itself is a cultural attribute. But I don't think things like gentrification start when we start to see things like the people who feel as though our communities or change when you start to see a doggy daycare in it. That doesn't happen. That's not when gentrification starts. Gentrification starts to happen when I feel that we don't see value in it. And just because we don't see that there's value in it doesn't mean that it's not there. Predatory speculators, the private equity real estate companies who now own more than 20% of all American homes know that there's value in the same communities in which Habitat for Humanity Seattle's working in. But we need to be real clear about that. We should be scared about that. And that's one of the reasons why I love what you're doing, because you're actively providing an antidote to stuff like that. So bless you for that. But this is our approach to community development. It's this talent retention approach. It needs to be beautiful. It means to tell people that they should have something gorgeous to be around, a beautiful built environment and a natural one. Commercially viable spaces so that people can meet and greet and be cool with one another and show off themselves as well. You want to build community, but not necessarily have a community center, the kind in which, some somewhat shady developers would build just to increase the amount of units they can build, but really quality housing, that makes people feel great with home ownership opportunities as well. They want also opportunities for people to have good paying jobs and build businesses as well, because people want to feel good about where they are. They don't want to have poverty associated with them as part of their culture. That old crack house that I used to walk by on my way to the subway, this is now, 30 years later, 30-some years later, the hip-hop cafe called the Boogie Down Grind, which we started back in 2016. It is an homage to our culture, which is hip-hop. And for those of you who don't know, it's the 50th anniversary of hip-hop. It was born in the South Bronx. You're all welcome. And so we're super excited about that. But building this space was all about creating the kind of opportunities for folks to showcase themselves. Everything from having a beautiful opportunity, to do open mics and book readings and all of those wonderful things. But it also made some people very scared, to be honest. We were protested at one point, because people believe that, oh, it's a coffee shop, it can't possibly be for us. So we are immediately pushing it away. And again, if you're led to believe, that poverty is part of your culture, then the things that the world tells you aren't for you start to look really weird. And but what was really ironic about that day is that the day that we were protested, we had 15 people outside with bullhorns, yelling about how horrible I am. And then on the inside, we had more than 40 people assembled for a home ownership workshop that included lenders who were there to offer 0% interest loans to local homeowners. So I was just like, you know what? Y'all can call me what you want. I know what I'm doing. And thank you very much. And this happens to be one of the first investors in our coffee shop, an immigrant from Honduras. Her husband's Jamaican, and they actually invested in our coffee shop, one of the first ones. And so we're doing that in other projects that we're working on as well. And last, this is a old former juvenile detention facility. It was just this awful place that we all knew growing up, because it's a block away from the house I grew up in. And it broke children. My dad was a janitor there back in from the 60s to the 70s, and he hated the fact that it broke kids. And he would often tell my mom, because I heard him say this, that he wished our house was bigger so that we could take some of the kids in, because that was the time when literally policies were such that that if a parent did something bad, that their kid would also go to juvie when they found them. I mean, it was really kind of messed up. But anyway, when it finally closed, thank God, I realized that's when I started to think about this place could be used. It's 5 acres of land in New York City. Come on. We can do the kind of sustainable, really, truly transformational real estate development that could have a social, environmental, and economic opportunity for people in our communities, and also create opportunities for both home ownership, as well as rentals, for supportive housing. I mean, you name it, we could do it. We did the economic analysis to understand where were the growth opportunities, so that people in our own communities could also be the business leaders, and also great public space as well, and then also commercial spaces, so that we can actually have a living and local economy with jobs for opportunities there. I'm gonna skip this one. But the whole point is that we wanted to create new opportunities, driving out the bad uses of neighborhoods, and to really create a kind of 24-hour city where there's opportunities for people to have 3 shifts to work in on the same place that used to be a really lonely road. Real opportunities for business development, for home ownership, et cetera. And we wanted to use this as an opportunity, not just to say, oh look, we did a cute thing here. No, we wanted it to raise the bar for what passed for economic and housing development in a low-status community like the South Bronx. And we were so excited when the opportunity came, for us to really try to, apply to be the developer on that site. We built this amazing team. We had more women, and people of color, equity developers, as part of our team. And we had an opportunity to do, our project consisted of more than 1,200 units of mixed income housing, including a 100-unit project that was designed by Habitat for Humanity's New York City, for 100 units of low-income home ownership, which I'm so excited. I will work with them one day. And then there was more than 200,000 unit spaces for feet of both commercial as well as light industrial and cultural space that was all about creating more than 800 jobs. Permanent jobs, not just the construction, the permanent jobs. And we were so happy to be able to put this out there. And I had to tell you, we had this truly diverse team. And also, I just want to be clear, we had 6 members of our team. 2 of them were white men. And I was like, see, I value diversity. This is how it looks, people. And so I was just like, look, we got the best team, we got the best project, and even if it wasn't us, it's gonna be something that's super good. And unfortunately, our city decided to do the same kind of status quo development that they always did, and still have done to date, where they decided that they were going to build an exclusively low-income housing project with a health clinic and a big community center. That was the winning bid. Oh, yeah, and it was also developed only and exclusively by 2 white male developers. And that was it. But I haven't given up hope yet, because I know I'm going to be working with Habitat for Humanity in New York City, and we are going to build like the most amazing project, almost as cool as the ones that you've been building over here. And I'm super excited about that, because this is the kind of quote that I always close my talks with. This is Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail, and it just talks about the impatience that I know members of the tribe that I'm in really feel about how do you create the kind of communities that make people feel like they've got something to look forward to, the ones that actually like literally bleed with the kind of hope and possibility that makes people want to give more of themselves to help make their communities an even better place to be, because they happen to be in them, because they actually happen to have the ability to see and be happy and supported and loved. Because we can afford to be gracious, we can afford to be generous, we can afford to build the kind of places that make people feel that we don't have to move out of our neighborhoods to live in better ones. Thank you very much.